Hi, I'm Dr. Ken Henry, and this is Conservative Commentary. Well, if you had any doubt that the Democrats were engaged in lawfare, I think those doubts have just been erased. But before we begin that discussion, I would like to ask you for a favor. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really helps us grow the channel and get the message out. Also, hop over to youtube.com/@KennethJHenry and check out our other videos. Well, if you had any doubt that the Democrats were engaged in lawfare, that probably should be extinguished by now. Jack Smith, the infamous special counsel, is in talks with the Department of Justice to figure out how they can wind down and close out the now pending cases against President Trump in the federal system. Judge Juan Merchan in New York has a decision to make about what to do with that stupid, unlawful, unconstitutional, baseless conviction that happened in his court. And the odds are that he's going to most likely dismiss these convictions against Trump. And then there's Fani Willis in Georgia. That case that she brought has so many problems, I don't see how it could possibly survive. But the big question that was answered was, were the Democrats engaged in lawfare? And the obvious answer is yes. And I think the American people had it with this nonsense and the attempts to destroy democracy. You know, these fools ran around chanting Trump was a threat to democracy. He's going to destroy our democracy. He's going to take your rights. But then they used the justice system against a political opponent. Now, I think Americans saw through exactly what was going on. And that was part of what propelled Trump to such a large victory on Tuesday. It'll be interesting to follow what happens in these lawsuits and how they try to get out of them and get them off the books and close them out and try to save face, which I think is impossible. Take a look at this segment that ran on Fox News and share your thoughts about this nonsense in the comments.
Trump's former AG, Bill Barr, is saying all prosecutors should dismiss their cases against the president-elect. Listen.
I think the president really is going to have any legal problems going forward. These cases are not going to go forward, neither the federal cases nor the state cases against the president. So I think it's really a question of how these governments, the federal government, the Justice Department, is going to dismount from the limb it's gotten itself out on.
Katie Cherkasky is a constitutional law attorney, former federal prosecutor, joins me now. Chanley did a really good synopsis of what's going on. Let's start with the Fed cases. We have documents, we have election interference. Chanley mentioned that DOJ longstanding policy, a sitting president cannot be prosecuted. That phrase, wind down Jack Smith's case. Describe what a wind down of Jack Smith's cases looks like.
Well, I think big picture here, if you haven't been able to convict someone in the court of public opinion, there's really no legitimate way you can convict them in a court of law. And every prosecutor has discretion about what cases they bring forward. These cases, we've called them lawfare, and that's because they're cases that have stretched the bounds of any prior precedent. They're never before seen interpretations of criminal law. So in terms of winding down these cases, they essentially can dismiss them really at any time, or obviously when Donald Trump takes office, he will dismiss the cases and summarily fire Jack Smith. So there's many different ways that the cases could end. They're not practically going to trial anytime soon, even if Trump had lost. But at this point, I do agree that they need to be concluded.
So the takeaway on the Fed cases, they're done, finito, over. Then there is the New York State Court case. All focus now goes there. This is the Stormy Daniels case. He's got sentencing less than 3 weeks from now. What happens there?
Well, that case also is complicated because of the Supreme Court's ruling regarding immunity. So essentially, there is sentencing scheduled, but before that can even proceed, Judge Merchan is expected to rule on whether that case actually is tainted by the immunity ruling, meaning that they allowed in inadmissible evidence and that the case would essentially have to be reversed and go back to trial, or ultimately go back up to the Supreme Court to determine whether the immunity ruling impacted it. So for all intents and purposes, again, that case could also be dismissed. but it doesn't have to be. If there is any adverse ruling to President Trump, it's immediately appealable, meaning that if Judge Merchan says the immunity case does not end that case summarily, that would be essentially appealed anyway. And then, of course, I guess he could sentence him at some point to jail time, again, something that would be immediately appealable and probably stayed pending a decision by the higher court. So for all practical purposes, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. The question is how far these people will continue to push these cases.
There's also the logic of all this. You find me the NYPD officer, Department of Corrections officer, or New York State Police that's going to physically put Donald Trump in handcuffs. There are 0 of them. Not one of them is going to do it because they know the ramifications to that would be massive. So I think that's another logic aspect of this that we need to pay attention to. Let's sit down to Georgia, the Georgia election interference case. Is this thing dead too?
Well, of course, with state cases, the president doesn't have the right to pardon themselves or to have their attorney general essentially end those cases. But the Georgia case, again, has so many significant legal issues that are still up on appeal that even if Trump had lost, that case would still not be heading to trial anytime soon. So I think that the case still has a chance to be overturned essentially by the appellate courts. But even if it's not, it eventually will have significant problems getting reviewed by the Supreme Court anyway. So it won't proceed while he's in office. For all intents and purposes, it is also basically dead in the water.
I want you to write a headline for this entire segment. Is Lawfare dead?
Well, I would hope so. I think that it spectacularly failed. And when we